Come abbiamo visto nella sessione, diciamo, che è stata presieduta da Mario Infelice, più o meno si è parlato di un contesto italiano e vorrei anche farvi notare che naturalmente tutta la parte del progetto MEI non solo si concentra sulla parte economica, diciamo così, della produzione del libro, ma che banca dati può essere anche utilizzata per altri modi. E volevo solo notarvi, e anche lo vedete anche nella mostra, che proprio in questi giorni stiamo terminando con Cristina e anche con Lavinia Prosdocimi dell'Università di Padova un grande saggio che ricostruisce proprio la storia della biblioteca del convento di San Giorgio Maggiore, cioè oggi appunto la Cini, chi andava a vedere la Cini, e all'interno abbiamo trovato, cioè MEI praticamente ha trovato tutti quelli che hanno lavorato in MEI. Noi sapevamo solo di 78 incunaboli che erano presenti alla biblioteca a 1806. Oggi abbiamo un catalogo di 164 incunaboli, una parte di essi anche usciti ben prima della caduta della Repubblica, e abbiamo potuto ricostruire anche una parte della biblioteca della Old Library, appunto. Sapete che San Giorgio aveva 4 biblioteche, quella della Manica Lunga è la quarta. E come vedete appunto della mostra c'è anche questa parte lì, quindi come metodo, come anche case study, anche queste sono cose che sono uscite da questa banca dati. Allora adesso allarghiamo gli orizzonti appunto e andiamo a vedere tre case studies che sono appunto uno a Memmingen, uno a Lione e uno in Catalogna. E il primo speaker, la prima speaker appunto, è Claire Bolton, appunto, che ha lavorato, diciamo così, come editor o printer, letterpress printer, ok, per 40 anni, ecco, e che ha fatto il suo dottorato appunto su Johann Zeiner, e che anche ha scritto e ha pubblicato moltissimo, e lei ci parlerà appunto del Memmingen Book Network. Okay?
Is that it? Okay, right. In the second half of the 15th century, the city of Memmingen was the most important settlement in the Allgäu region of southern Germany, a trade center on the river Iller, lying on the east-west salt route from Bohemia to Lindau and the north-south route from northern Europe to Italy, with a population of about 5,000. By 1480, there was a book printer, 4 bookbinders, and a new purpose-built paper mill. North is to the right. 5 kilometers to the west is the Charterhouse Monastery of Buxheim, famous, oh, it hasn't gone, sorry, let's go there. Oh, none of that worked, right? Okay, north is to the right. 5 kilometers to the west is the Charterhouse Monastery of Buxheim, famous for its library. And 12 kilometers to the southeast lies the Benedictine Monastery of Ottobeuren. Volker Hörnemann, in his study on the Buxheim collection, stated, right from the beginning, Buxheim was connected with learned people who owned and produced books and donated them to the monks. Many of these connections were with people from Memmingen. For this study, I have included Buxheim. This was a period of growth for the city as businesses expanded, with new warehouses for storing salt and grain, and increased income from fine linen production and ironworking. The guilds built new guild houses, some of the religious houses were rebuilt or expanded, and during the 1470s, living standards were at their peak. Trade was not only in agricultural and household goods, there was also a trade in books. Some of the information in this paper has been described before by earlier scholars, but here I am bringing the disparate pieces of information together and show Memmingen at the center of a scholarly book network. Firstly, using Paul Needham's splendid IPI, now in May, for Memmingen provenance, and then the Memmingen Stadtbibliothek with over 600 incunables. Some of these incunables came from Petrus Mitter de Caprarius and the Antonia House. Unfortunately, there are no donor records documenting the arrival of the incunabula at the Stadtbibliothek. Some books do have provenance inscriptions, but many of these are from later centuries. However, gradually, a list of copies, almost 600, with a Memmingen link, came together. The book owners range from having very large collections, as with Hilprand Brandenburg at Buxheim, to some whose names only appear on one book. It is not truly accurate to call them book buyers, because the religious houses with libraries acquired many of their books as donations. The religious houses shown here all had books, and we will look at some of them. Perhaps the earliest Memmingen book collector was Petrus Mitter de Caprarius, preceptor of the Antonia House in Memmingen from 1439 until his death in 1479. From his student days in Heidelberg and Paris in the 1450s, he had commissioned manuscripts, with all the costs being paid by the order. Franz Sammer's thesis on Petrus Mitter's collection stated that he spent over 2,000 florins on at least 242 Latin manuscripts. Details can be found in the Antonia House original account books in the Memmingen Stadtarchiv. While buying books, he was also building the Antonia House with rooms to store his increasing library. And the library was the room over the entrance and also in the adjoining St. Peter's Chapel. Petrus Mitter moved from buying manuscripts to buying printed books, many purchased personally on his travels, as this one, bought when he was in Rome in 1469. Mitter's books were left to the Antonia House on his death, and they later went to Irsi Monastery, and today 47 are in Memmingen Stadtbibliothek. He helpfully wrote purchase notes in a number of his books. Perhaps his best example, not this one, I'm sorry, was his purchase of Hieronymus's 2-volume Epistolae, direct from Swainham and Panitz in Rome, giving the date, 1468, the price of the books, 10 ducats, the rubricating and binding, 4 ducats, and the transport to Memmingen, 2 ducats, totaling 16 ducats, about 12 Rhenish florins. Much has been written about Buxheim's monastic library with its many donors and the locations of the books today. The largest benefactor was Hilprand Brandenburg, priest donate at Buxheim. His donations are recorded in their benefactor's book from 1479. By Brandenburg's death in 1514, he had donated 450 books, as well as money to build a library and a chapel. None have any prices, but many have Brandenburg's gift inscription and some his bookplate, printed for him by Memmingen printer Albrecht Kühne. Like Petrus Mitter, Brandenburg had started buying manuscripts and then moved to printed books, probably when in Basel between 1469 and 72. Ulrich Ellenboog was the city doctor for Memmingen from 1481 to 99, with an interest in printing at the press of St. Ulrich and Afra in Augsburg. His earliest purchase of a printed book was a Cicero from Cologne in 1470. Of the 38 editions he purchased, over half were theological. Only one has a price of 2 Rhenish florins for Donatus's Commentarius in Terentiae, printed by Rusch in Strasbourg in 1473. Ellenboog left his books to his son Nicholas, prior at Oboiren, who was in correspondence with Johann Reuchlin and the scholarly network in Basel, and with Erasmus. Ellenboog's books had been printed in 14 different towns from as far apart as Paris, Lyon, Venice, Cologne, and Ulm. 4 had been bound in Augsburg and 4 in Memmingen, 2 of these at the bindery at Buxheim. Ellenboog also wrote 2 tracts about the plague, both of which were printed by Memmingen printer Albrecht Kühne. Jakob Matzenberger was priest in charge of the Frauenkirche. No donations of any of his books have been found, but there are 13 printed books with his provenance. Johann Fasnacht was prior of the Augustiner Eremiten order, and there are 10 books with his provenance printed between 1473 and 88. Dr. Johann Wesbach was a jurist in Memmingen and donor to Buxheim. There are 12 books with his inscription, but none have any dates of purchase or prices paid. The books he donated were printed between 1472 and 96, and he purchased some books printed by Kühne. In contrast to these larger collectors, there is one book purchased most unusually by a merchant, Johannes Hutter. His wealth had come from ironworks. A picture is building of who bought books, theologians, clerics, lawyers, doctors, where they were bound and where they were donated. Some of Memmingen's book network, with printer Albrecht Kühne in the middle, encouraged to come to Memmingen, perhaps by the Antonia House. Although not a major printer in the incunable world, he printed for a number of Memmingen scholars, printed indulgences, and also worked as a bookseller of his own editions and those of other printers. The religious houses received donations from almost everyone. The binderies were busy, with Kiris 176 having the most custom. Albrecht Kühne may also have been a bookseller because he printed this book list of 200 titles available for sale around 1500. Only these fragments remain, but some idea of the range of titles can be seen, covering legal matters, medical, classics, almanacs. Top line of the left section in red states that the books had come from Venice, Nuremberg, and Basel, but I can't see it. Almost 80% of Memmingen books were printed in Germany, and the majority came from Augsburg and Strasbourg, perhaps because they were nearby. Almost 20% were printed in Italy, with over half of the Italian books coming from Venice. But the same number of books came from Rome, over 900 kilometers distant, as from Ulm, just up the road 60 kilometers away, so maybe distance was not a factor. We know that in the late 1460s, Petrus Mitter purchased personally when traveling and had books shipped home. Brandenburg purchased books through traveling book agents of Peter Schöffer and some from another agent working for Johann Mentelin. As the number of printers and books increased, so did the trade in books, using the existing channels of traveling salesmen and of trade fairs, such as the 14-day fair at Nördlingen. From the 1480s, Peter Drach's account book for his book-selling business in Speyer lists his use of carters and agents transporting quantities of books to many towns in southern Germany. In June 1484, using his carter in Augsburg, he sent books he had purchased there to the fair in Nördlingen. The unsold stock later went on to the Frankfurt Fair for the autumn fair there. Petrus Mitter had good deals with local carters to Nördlingen. The subject matter of the books was very similar between those in the Buxheim collection and those by owners in Memmingen. Unsurprisingly, with most of the owners being theologians, theology was the most popular at 70%, followed by canon law at 11%, and 2% of Bibles, breviaries, and psalters, and the remaining 17% being made up of humanist literature, classics, astrology, grammars, medical. Few of the Memmingen books have any prices, and most of the prices have come from Petrus Mitter, who may or may not be representative. He paid a lot for his books and for illumination and binding. However, for comparison, Petrus Mitter paid a total of 14 Rhenish florins for the purchase of the 2-volume Rainerus de Pisa's Pantheologica. An Ulm purchaser of the same edition, now in Ulm Stadtbibliothek, paid 12 florins for the 2 volumes, plus 24 groschen for rubricating and 22 groschen for binding, totaling 14 florins and 6 groschen. The two prices are very close. In contrast, priest Eustachius Funk paid 1 Rhenish florin for this book, a 312-page chancery folio. Most likely, this was the unbound price. Other chancery folios cost 4 and 5 florins, which may or may not have included binding. Median folios, 11 florins. Royal folios, 10 ducats for 2 volumes, 14 florins, including binding. Imperial folios, 8 florins for 407 pages, 9.5 florins for 276 pages, and 20 florins for 2 volumes, rubricated, illuminated, bound, and transported. Compare this to some prices for food and labor, although they fluctuated through this period. The rent of a paper mill for the same price of a 2-volume book. 7 days' labor for the price of 1 small book. Incidentally, in 1488, almost £2,000 hella was raised in Memmingen from the sale of indulgences. A very quick look at Memmingen's bookbinders, who were part of the book network. They all liked acorns, as can be seen by the tools of the 4-binderies shown here. Kiris 110 had most tools, and Kiris 176 had most bindings attributed to it. One of Petrus Mitter's books, bound in Memmingen by Kiris 176. To summarize, most buyers, collectors, were doctors, theologians, lawyers, and humanist scholars, and hardly any merchants. They were in correspondence with others further afield and were part of the intellectual humanist movement that changed people's thinking. This conference is not discussing 16th century. However, many of the Memmingen people who appear towards the end of the 15th century also appear in the 16th. Memmingen's book network in the late 15th century helped to lay the groundwork for the events of the early 16th century with the Reformation and a peasants' revolt that started in Memmingen. Grazie. Over time?
Grazie Claire.